Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere that smells faintly of roasted grain, damp clay, and the kind of heat that never really leaves the air, even at dawn. You're standing in ancient Mesopotamia, long before breakfast was something you could grab from a box. The world around you hums with the soft sounds of the earliest civilization, and right now, your stomach is telling you it's time to see what's cooking. You probably won't survive this, historically speaking, since plumbing, refrigeration, and basic hand washing aren't exactly booming industries yet. Still, for tonight's little time travel adventure, you'll manage just fine. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The sky above you is still gray, the horizon somewhere between dream and daylight. A few stars cling to the edges as the first curls of smoke rise from the mud brick homes of the town. You can smell it already, barley. Warm, nutty, faintly sweet. The aroma drifts down narrow alleys, curling around low walls, catching in the still air of dawn. Someone, somewhere, is baking bread. You trudge down a dirt lane, your sandals kicking up fine dust that glows faintly gold in the light of the awakening sun. Chickens scatter. A goat bleats irritably, unimpressed by your early enthusiasm for culinary history. You pass a woman kneeling beside a clay oven, her hands moving rhythmically, pressing out small rounds of dough. The bread looks simple, flat, round, maybe sprinkled with crushed seeds, but it's the kind of food that built empires. Barley was the grain of choice here, the foundation of nearly everything edible. Wheat existed, sure, but barley could handle the dry, salty soils that other crops couldn't. The farmers along the Tigris and Euphrates grew it in endless fields, and it became as common in Mesopotamian diets as oxygen. You crouch near the oven, feeling the wave of heat against your face. The woman, let's call her Ninsutu because that's an actual Sumerian name, flicks her wrist to signal that you're welcome to watch. She's been awake since before the first rooster dared to crow. The dough she's working with was mixed the night before, left to rest under a cloth woven from date palm fibers. There's no yeast here in the modern sense, just a bit of old dough saved from yesterday. Fermentation's quiet gift passed forward day by day. She slaps one piece of dough against the oven's inner wall. You watch it stick for a second, then slowly puff as the heat licks across its surface. The smell deepens. It's toasty, comforting, like the scent of breakfast filtered through 5,000 years. You might be hungry enough to eat half a loaf, but she breaks off a small piece and hands it to you instead. It's still too hot to hold. You juggle it awkwardly. She smiles. The bread tastes earthy, dense, not the fluffy, loaf-sized miracle you're used to. There's a faint crunch from a few unground grains, a whisper of smoke, and a satisfaction that has nothing to do with butter. This is survival food, steady, reliable, grounding. Every worker, every farmer, every scribe chewing his stylus at the temple school depended on bread like this. Historians still argue whether these early loaves were considered sacred or simply practical. After all, many temples listed barley offerings right alongside gold and cattle. Maybe the gods appreciated carbs as much as humans do. From a nearby doorway, someone pours a liquid into a clay jug. It looks suspiciously like water, but the smell says otherwise. It's beer. Mesopotamian beer wasn't the bubbly kind you'd find in a modern pub. It was thick, soupy, and probably chewed more than sipped. But we'll get there later. For now, the scent of malt mingles with baking bread until it's hard to tell where one ends and the other begins. As you wander farther down the street, the town slowly comes alive. Clay pots clink. A donkey brays, unimpressed by civilization's progress. You pass a group of men carrying bundles of reeds, perhaps for thatching roofs or lining ovens. One of them waves a flat, blackened disc at you. It's yesterday's bread, burnt around the edges, but still edible. Waste not, want not. You pass a small shrine tucked into the wall of a courtyard, its niche holding a simple figurine made of clay. A wisp of incense curls upward, carrying the faint scent of cedar. Offerings sit beside it, some grain, a bit of bread, maybe even a few dried figs. Food was not just nourishment here, it was conversation with the divine. The air is warmer now, the sky washed in gold. You hear the slap of more dough on oven walls echoing down side streets. For a moment, it's easy to imagine that the entire city is synchronized. Every household baking, grinding, stirring in unison. It's a culinary heartbeat. There's something humble yet beautiful about how every meal begins here. A handful of barley, a bit of water, a fire. From these, an entire world of flavor and tradition unfolds. Even the tools, simple grinding stones called quorns, carry stories in their worn surfaces. The rhythmic scrape of stone against stone must have been the Mesopotamian version of morning radio. Ninsutu wipes her hands on her tunic and tosses a few crumbs to the chickens. Her children tumble out of the doorway, yawning, hair tangled. One snatches a piece of bread and runs off down the street. Another pokes at the fire with a stick. It's the same chaos you'd find in any modern kitchen before school, just with more clay dust and fewer Pop-Tarts. A quick historical tidbit drifts into your thoughts as you chew the last of your bread. Archaeologists once discovered a bakery in the ruins of Ur, its ovens still blackened with soot, grain husks scattered across the floor. Some of those husks dated back more than 4,000 years. Imagine the remains of someone's breakfast surviving long enough to confuse a 21st century researchers. You follow the faint sound of running water down toward the edge of the irrigation canals. The air there feels cooler, heavy with the smell of mud and reeds. Farmers are already at work, using shadoofs, simple weighted poles with buckets, to lift water onto their fields. You realize that every bite of bread, every sip of beer, every bowl of porridge starts here, in this delicate balance between human effort and the mercy of the rivers. Historians still debate whether early Mesopotamians saw their rivers as benevolent givers or unpredictable gods with mood swings. You can't blame them. One bad flood, and breakfast becomes a memory. By now, the sun is fully up. You sit on a low wall, breaking the rest of your bread and watching the city pulse awake. A potter wheels by, his hands already dusted with clay. A scribe shuffles past, clutching his reed stylus and muttering about some new tax records. The smells from the homes, grain, onions, something frying, drift together into one comforting haze. Somewhere nearby, a rooster lets out a triumphant crow, as if announcing that civilization itself has successfully survived another night. You take a deep breath. The day has just begun. But in a world like this, food isn't merely about filling your stomach. It's a thread connecting every household, every god, every life. That single loaf of barley bread, simple and smoky, is the glue holding the whole of Mesopotamian society together. And as you brush the last crumbs from your hands, you realize the same quiet truth Ninsutu probably feels every morning. It all begins with bread. The smell of bread still lingers on your fingertips as you wander away from the quiet lanes of dawn and into the growing hum of the city. The sun, now bright and firm, spills gold over mud brick walls and glints off the clay rooftops. The morning heat builds fast here. It's barely past breakfast, and you can already feel that dry shimmer in the air that makes everything seem to vibrate slightly. You tug your light shawl tighter over your shoulders because the next stop in your Mesopotamian day isn't a quiet kitchen anymore. It's the heart of the city, the marketplace of Ur. You turn a corner and there it is, a sprawling, uneven square where the smell of life hits you like a warm, fragrant wall. The scent of freshly baked bread melts into that of dried fish, onions, and the sweet tang of dates baking in the sun. It's not exactly pleasant, but it's alive. 100 conversations overlap in the air, voices bartering, laughing, calling out prices. Somewhere in the mix, a goat bleats, unimpressed with economic exchange rates. You step carefully between puddles left from the morning waterfalls. The ground beneath your feet is packed earth, scattered with stray bits of straw and fragments of broken pottery. A man with a gray beard and a face that looks like it's seen every sunrise since the dawn of agriculture waves you over to his stall. He's surrounded by baskets, some woven from reeds, others patched from date palm leaves. Each one overflows with barley, lentils, chickpeas, and mysterious seeds that glint like tiny jewels in the light. He offers you a handful of barley kernels to inspect. You roll them in your palm, feeling their smoothness. These grains are currency as much as food. Workers, priests, and even temple scribes are often paid in measures of barley. You can almost imagine yourself back in your own world trying to pay rent with bags of oats. The economy would collapse within a week, but at least breakfast would be sorted. Historians still argue whether these early markets were strictly commercial or also social, whether people came more to buy grain or to gossip about who's marrying whom. Judging by the chatter around you, it's probably both. Across from the grain cellar, a woman stands behind a table lined with jars of honey and thick, dark date syrup that glows amber in the sun. She dips a reed spoon into one jar and lets the syrup drizzle slowly into a small cup for you to taste. It's sweet, almost too sweet, and you can feel the sugar hitting your bloodstream with prehistoric efficiency. She smiles knowingly. The syrup doubles as both dessert and medicine here, good for the stomach, the throat, and probably the soul. You drift on through the crowd, following the rhythmic cries of traders. A young man with a basket balanced on his head walks by, selling onions and garlic tied together in long strings. You catch a hint of the sharp, spicy scent as he passes. You'll meet those flavors later in the kitchens, but here, in the raw sun, they're powerful enough to make your eyes water. Farther along, the air grows cooler. Strange, since there's no shade. Then you realize it's not cooler at all, it's damp. You're near the fish cellars now, and that unmistakable smell of the Euphrates follows. Broad wooden trays display silver-scaled fish laid out neatly, their eyes glinting like tiny moons. Some are already salted and drying in the open air, while others swim sluggishly in clay vats, waiting for someone to point and say, "That one." One fisherman, a big man with sunburned shoulders, calls out to you and gestures toward his catch. He grins, saying something about a good price for the freshest fish in Ur. You have no currency that makes sense here, but you nod appreciatively, and he seems satisfied. He points toward a nearby building where smoke curls from a rooftop vent. "Cook there," he says, or something close enough that you get the idea. As you pass, a small boy runs up, clutching what looks like a clay tablet. Not the kind used for prayers or taxes, but one scrawled with a list of goods. He's an apprentice scribe, working for a merchant, probably the ancient world's version of a grocery assistant. He pauses to watch a street performer juggle 3 small clay cups, one of which occasionally drops, earning him laughter but surprisingly generous tips. You realize suddenly that this market isn't just about food, it's the bloodstream of the city. Here, every person plays a part. Farmers, bakers, brewers, fishmongers, even temple accountants, all flowing in and out, trading the very essence of civilization. A few steps later, you stumble upon something that could almost be a deli counter. A woman sits beside a low table, serving steaming bowls of something thick and golden. You catch the smell. Barley stew, maybe? Or lentil porridge flavored with herbs. She ladles a portion into a small clay bowl and hands it to you with a smile that says, "You look like you need breakfast number 2. You take a cautious sip. It's warm, hearty, and spiced with something you can't quite name. Perhaps coriander, perhaps magic. You sit for a while at the edge of her stall, the bowl warming your hands as you watch people pass by. A man leading a donkey piled high with clay pots shouts something at a baker. 2 temple officials in long robes argue over grain tallies. Somewhere nearby, a musician plucks a lyre, its soft, repetitive tune blending perfectly with the rhythm of barter and trade. It's oddly hypnotic, like listening to the pulse of civilization itself. One quirky tidbit for you: archaeologists once found small receipts written on clay tablets buried near market sites just like this. Some list items like 2 measures of barley, 1 jar of oil, 3 loaves of bread. The world's first shopping lists, baked hard by accident or design. Imagine someone, thousands of years later, digging up your old grocery note that says milk, eggs, bread, maybe snacks, and calling it an artifact. You stand again, wiping the last of the stew from your fingers, and make your way toward the far end of the square. Here, the crowd thins a little. You find stalls selling spices, dried herbs, and bundles of reeds tied neatly with string. The smell shifts from food to earth, dusty, woody, faintly bitter. You pick up a handful of dried herbs. They crumble between your fingers, releasing a scent that reminds you of thyme and sage. Some of these plants were used in cooking, others in medicine, or both, depending on the day. Historians still debate whether Mesopotamians had formal recipes or simply cooked by memory and feel. The surviving tablets suggest that professional cooks, especially those in temples and palaces, followed structured recipes, but ordinary families probably relied on instinct. Judging by the smell of what's simmering in pots all around you, their instincts were excellent. As the sun climbs higher, shade becomes a valuable commodity. Merchants stretch woven mats over their stalls, and the colors of the market shift into a soft, dappled glow. You can hear bees buzzing near the honey jars, the slap of sandals on clay, the creak of wooden carts. There's no rush here, no clock ticking above everyone's heads, just the slow rhythm of trade, guided by the sun and the stomach. You stop near a date seller's stall. The fruit glows deep brown, sticky with syrup. The vendor breaks one open and offers it to you. Inside, the flesh is soft and caramel sweet, like nature's candy. You bite into it and feel the sugar dissolve instantly on your tongue. It's easy to understand why dates were considered both food and luxury, fit for workers and kings alike. He tells you something about his dates coming from the groves near Uruk, where the trees grow tall and the fruit ripens early. You nod, pretending to understand his language, but catching enough of his tone to know he's proud. There's a small clay bowl beside him filled with crushed date seeds, used, he explains, for animal feed or sometimes ground into flour. Waste not, want not, once again. By the time you leave the market, your senses are almost overwhelmed. You've tasted honey, smelled fish, heard the pulse of barter, and seen the way this place holds a city together. The marketplace isn't just where people buy food. It's where they build trust, share news, and keep the social fabric alive. You pause at the edge of the square, looking back one last time. The air shimmers with heat and sound. A woman laughs. A merchant shouts about fresh bread. Somewhere, a baby cries, and a rooster crows, fashionably late. It's a scene that feels ancient and familiar all at once. The details have changed over millennia. No plastic bags, no credit cards, but the essence of a market, of human connection through food, hasn't changed a bit. You wipe a bit of honey from your lip and smile. The day's just getting started, and you've only scratched the surface of what the Mesopotamians had cooking. You follow the gentle hum of the market back toward the river, and somewhere between the honey stall and the sound of the lyre, the air changes again. It's thicker here, cooler too, and the scent is unmistakable. The faint tang of wet grain, half fermented and bubbling quietly in the shade. You've just stumbled into the lifeblood of Mesopotamian cuisine, the true star of their diet, economy, and weekend entertainment: barley. Barley wasn't just a crop here, it was the backbone of civilization. The grain that built cities, paid workers, filled bellies, and even sweetened prayers. You can almost hear an ancient accountant sighing as he scratches another tally of barley wages into a clay tablet. In Mesopotamia, money didn't jingle, it poured, measured by the basket, the jar, or the handful. You trail behind a pair of workers rolling a large sack toward a shaded courtyard. Inside, several women stand ankle-deep in a thick paste of barley dough, kneading it with their feet like winemakers crushing grapes. It's not as strange as it sounds. This was one of the ways to prepare mash for beer. The smell is sour-sweet, earthy, faintly nutty. One woman glances up at you, shrugs, and says something that might translate loosely to, "It's a living." Historians still argue whether Mesopotamian beer was meant to be delicious or just nutritious. Either way, it was everywhere, brewed in homes, temples, and taverns, consumed by everyone from kings to farmers. In some cities, even children drank it, diluted of course, since water wasn't always safe. You think about that the next time you reach for bottled water. Somewhere 5,000 years ago, a Sumerian parent was probably saying, "Drink your beer, it's good for you." A brewer beckons you closer to watch his process. He wears a long tunic, his hands coated in the same sticky mash he's stirring in a large clay vat. He tosses in a handful of dried dates for sweetness, then covers the mixture with a reed mat. You lean in, and the heat rising from the fermentation hits you in the face. The smell is alive, yeasty, tangy, almost fruity. He offers you a sip from a wide, straw-like tube, a beer straw designed to filter out bits of grain and foam. You take a cautious taste. The liquid is thick, almost like porridge, and surprisingly cool. It's sour, yes, but with a subtle sweetness that lingers. You can see why this was called sikaru, the drink of joy. You're not sure how joyful you feel, but you can imagine a hard day's labor ending with a jug or two of this and a lot of loud storytelling. Nearby, several clay jars are lined up, sealed with mud lids and marked with wedge-shaped impressions, ancient labels. Each one indicates the batch's origin, date, and type of beer. Some are for temple offerings, others for trade. Archaeologists have found tablets listing over 20 varieties of beer, with names that roughly translate to things like dark beer, sweet beer, and beer for the people. You silently hope that last one wasn't made from yesterday's leftovers. Barley wasn't just for drinking, though. It was for eating, storing, trading, even worshiping. A few steps away, you find another group of workers spreading freshly harvested barley across woven mats to dry under the sun. The grains glint pale gold in the light, like 1,000 tiny coins. One worker picks up a handful and lets them trickle through his fingers with the casual grace of someone who knows he's holding the foundation of his world. He points toward the river, where you can see the irrigation channels stretching like veins through the fields. The barley crop depended entirely on those canals. Without the predictable rhythm of the rivers, without the careful engineering of dikes and sluices, none of this food, this beer, or this civilization would exist. And yet, even with all their knowledge, floods still came when they weren't wanted, droughts too. Historians still debate how much of Mesopotamian religion grew out of this fragile dance with the rivers, how much faith was born from the terror of losing breakfast. You kneel to run your fingers through the drying barley, feeling the warmth of the sun in each kernel. Somewhere, a donkey snorts, unimpressed by your poetic reverie. You smile and move on, following a path that leads past a cluster of brick storerooms. Their thick walls hold the city's reserves, grain collected as tax, tithes, or emergency stockpiles. Inside, you can smell the faint musk of dry grain and the cool dampness of clay. A scribe sits cross-legged near the doorway, pressing marks into a tablet with his reed stylus. Each wedge shape represents a measure, a transaction, a promise of future bread. He looks up, blinking at you, then gestures toward one of the massive jars. You peer inside. The jar is almost as tall as you, packed with barley so fine and uniform it looks like sand. It hums faintly, with the murmur of tiny beetles moving through it, the natural price of storage. The scribe shrugs, as if to say, extra protein. You suppress a grimace and step back into the light. As you walk, you catch sight of a small bakery tucked between two courtyards. The air inside is hot, shimmering. A man pulls flat rounds of barley bread from a clay oven, the same kind you saw earlier in the morning. These, though, are sprinkled with something dark, sesame seeds maybe. The baker offers you one, and you take a bite. It's smoky, crisp at the edges, soft in the center. The earthy flavor of barley pairs beautifully with the nutty topping. You close your eyes for a moment. Civilization tastes good. One quirky little detail you might enjoy: some Mesopotamian temples had special festivals where barley beer flowed freely for days, and participants, both human and divine, were expected to drink heartily. One hymn to the goddess Ninkasi, the patron of brewing, even doubles as a recipe, describing how beer was made step by step. Imagine a religion where your holy text doubles as a homebrew guide. You find yourself thinking about how much of human progress has been built on this humble grain. Barley fueled the workers who built ziggurats, fed the soldiers who guarded the city walls, and filled the bowls of scribes who shaped the world's first written language. Without barley, there might never have been clay tablets, taxes, or complaints about taxes. The sun is higher now, the air trembling with heat. You step into a narrow alley for shade, leaning against a cool wall. Somewhere nearby, someone drops a jar. It shatters with a sharp crack, followed by a chorus of groans and laughter. A familiar sound, timeless. You can almost imagine a Mesopotamian teenager saying, "It wasn't my fault," as his parents sighs deeply in Akkadian. A breeze drifts in from the river, carrying with it the scent of wet grain and yeast. It's oddly soothing. The rhythm of daily life here is grounded in food, barley as the center, everything else orbiting around it. The bread, the beer, the trade, the offerings, they all start with those golden kernels waving in the wind. Historians still argue whether barley's dominance was due to climate, culture, or simple convenience. But standing here, watching the city hum with its harvest, you realize it doesn't matter. Barley was the anchor of this world, the constant heartbeat beneath everything else. You take one last sip from the brewer's clay cup, the liquid thick and slightly fizzy, then hand it back with a polite nod. The brewer smiles broadly, clapping you on the shoulder in the universal gesture of "you're all right." You feel a pleasant warmth spreading through your chest, maybe from the beer, maybe from the sun, maybe from the quiet joy of realizing that 5,000 years ago, people were already experts at taking grain, water, and time and turning them into happiness. You look down at your hands, dusty with flour, sticky with malt, and wonder if this is how civilization really began. Not with swords or empires, but with breakfast and beer. By the time you wander back toward the market streets, the air has shifted again. The yeast and barley scents of the breweries fade into something sweeter, thicker, richer, almost sticky. You catch it before you even see it, the unmistakable perfume of honey and dates warming in the late morning sun. It's the scent of Mesopotamian dessert, which, fortunately for you, involves a lot of sugar and absolutely zero chocolate. The street is alive with it. Merchants stir copper pots filled with golden honey. Young girls carry baskets of glossy brown dates strung together on palm fronds. And somewhere nearby, you can hear the bubbling hiss of syrup cooking over an open fire. The air hums with bees, too, little golden specks darting between stalls, busy as accountants during tax season. You move closer to one of the stalls. A woman, her arms bare and dusted with flour, is shaping what looks like small pastries on a flat board. She glances up and smiles, gesturing for you to try one. You pick it up gingerly. It's warm, dense, and coated in something sticky that glistens like amber. The first bite nearly glues your teeth together. The second, though, is heaven. Sweet, nutty, faintly smoky. You detect hints of sesame and date syrup, ingredients that seem to belong together, like bread and butter, but older, earthier. Dates were the candy of Mesopotamia. The trees grew tall and elegant along the riverbanks, their fruit harvested in thick bunches. You can still picture the farmers climbing the trunks barefoot, balancing on woven ladders as they twist each cluster free. Dried dates lasted for months, which made them both a dessert and a practical source of calories in a world where refrigeration was, well, still a few millennia away. You stroll through the street, chewing slowly, and watch as another vendor pours a thick stream of honey into a clay jar. The honey glows in the sunlight, catching tiny flecks of gold dust floating through the air. He tells you that this honey came from the marshlands south of Ur, where bees drink from wild reeds and water lilies. He says this with such pride that you almost believe it makes the honey taste different. You dip a finger in, because who are you to refuse 5,000-year-old hospitality? It's floral, delicate, and somehow less sweet than the syrupy stuff you're used to. There's a faint bitterness at the end, a reminder that this isn't factory-made sugar, but the work of thousands of tiny wings. Historians still argue whether honey in Mesopotamia was mainly a luxury item or a household staple. It shows up in royal inventories and temple offerings, but also in humble recipes and medicine lists. You suspect it was both. A sweet treat when available, a divine ingredient when not. After all, when sugar doesn't exist yet, honey is the closest thing to magic. You wander onward, past a family sitting cross-legged under a palm awning. The father is pressing a wooden mold into a thick paste of mashed dates and nuts. Each press leaves an intricate pattern, swirls, spirals, geometric stars. When he lifts the mold, the paste holds its shape, soft but firm, ready to be sliced into squares. It's Mesopotamian fudge, the kind of thing you'd bring to a festival or sneak after dinner when no one's looking. The youngest child, no older than 6, steals a piece and darts away laughing. The father sighs dramatically, then winks at you. The scene could have taken place in any century. Sweet theft is a universal constant. You take a seat near a shaded wall, watching the slow choreography of this ancient confectionery. The breeze carries the smell of crushed dates, honey, and something faintly roasted, nuts perhaps. A vendor beside you is stirring a pot of sesame seeds, heating them until they pop and crackle. He scoops a spoonful into a stone mortar, adding honey and a drizzle of date syrup. The rhythmic scrape, scrape, scrape of the pestle fills the air as he grinds it into a smooth paste. You watch, mesmerized. When he's done, he smears a bit onto a piece of bread and offers it to you. It's the ancestor of halva, tahini, and maybe even peanut butter. A sweet, nutty spread that's as addictive as it is ancient. You lick a bit from your thumb and grin. The man laughs and mutters something you're pretty sure means, "Told you so." A clay tablet resting near his stall catches your eye. It's covered in wedge marks, but unlike the others you've seen, this one has a drawing, an almost cartoonish depiction of a bee. He tells you it's a charm for sweet luck, carved by a friend from the temple workshops. You wonder whether that counts as branding. Somewhere nearby, a musician begins plucking a simple melody on a harp. The sound floats through the marketplace like a soft breeze, almost blending with the hum of bees. You lean back against the wall and close your eyes for a moment. The world smells of sugar and sun. A light laugh from the next stall catches your attention. 2 women are arguing cheerfully over the price of a jar of honey. One claims hers comes from the hives kept near the temple gardens, blessed by priests and therefore purer. The other rolls her eyes and says something along the lines of, "My bees don't need blessings, they just work harder." The first woman scoffs, crossing her arms, but her smirk gives her away. You'd swear you've seen this same argument at a modern farmer's market. Different millennium, same human pettiness. You move on, stopping to watch a man pour molten syrup over a tray of toasted grains and nuts. The sweet mixture hisses and bubbles before sending into a glossy, brittle slab. He cracks off a piece and offers it to you. It's crunchy, chewy, and just the right balance of sweet and smoky. Somewhere between granola bar and divine revelation. Historians still debate whether Mesopotamians considered these sweet foods indulgent or symbolic. Some scholars think honey and dates were linked to fertility rituals, given how often they appear in love poems and temple offerings. Others say they were just delicious and that we shouldn't overthink everything. Personally, you're siding with Team Delicious. You wander toward the edge of the marketplace, past a row of clay ovens still radiating heat. A young baker is pulling something unusual from one of them, a flat cake studded with dates, glistening with syrup. He cuts it into neat squares, places them on a reed mat to cool, and then sprinkles crushed nuts over the top. You hover, obviously too interested, and he laughs, handing you a piece before you even ask. It's dense and rich, almost fudgy. The dates have melted slightly, their sweetness infused through the dough. You close your eyes again, savoring it slowly, the way you'd savor a secret. Somewhere in the distance, a priest's chant drifts faintly over the rooftops, a reminder that sweetness and sanctity were never far apart here. There's something deeply human about all this, the need to sweeten life, to make celebration tangible, to turn grain and fruit into joy. Even in a world built on mud and toil, people found time to indulge, to create, to enjoy. You look up at the sky. The sun is blazing now, bees still buzzing lazily over the honey stalls. The air feels thick, golden, like the syrup still dripping from the edge of your fingers. You lick it off absently, tasting the past. If you ever wondered how ancient people celebrated, here's your answer. They didn't need sugar sculptures or elaborate desserts. A bit of honey, a handful of dates, a song drifting through the market. Sometimes that was enough. And as you turn to leave, brushing crumbs from your hands, you can't help but think, civilization might have started with barley, but it stayed alive because someone figured out how to make dessert. By late morning, the marketplace has mellowed into a slower rhythm. The early rush of traders and temple scribes fades, leaving behind the steady heartbeat of domestic errands. Women selecting vegetables for dinner, boys haggling for bundles of herbs, and somewhere the muffled thump of a pestle grinding spice into paste. The air itself seems to thicken with the perfume of onions, garlic, and crushed herbs. It's not the sweetness of dates or honey anymore. It's sharper, more alive, the scent of cooking in progress. You follow your nose to a shaded stall tucked between two pottery vendors. Clay jars line the counter, each brimming with chopped greens, sliced bulbs, and bundles of herbs tied with string. The stall-keeper is an older woman, her head wrapped in linen, her hands busy peeling a pile of small reddish onions. She doesn't look up right away, but gestures with her knife for you to come closer. When she finally does glance up, her face creases into a smile, the kind of smile people give when they see someone who clearly doesn't belong but means no harm. She plucks an onion from the pile and holds it out to you, speaking softly, as though imparting a secret. Samshinu, she says, the Akkadian word for onion. You repeat it clumsily. She laughs, a warm, throaty sound, and slices the onion neatly in half. The smell hits you immediately, pungent, tear-stinging, and somehow comforting. The scent of dinner before dinner. Onions were everywhere in ancient Mesopotamia. Archaeologists have found their remains preserved in jars, painted on walls, and even listed in temple records. They were one of the earliest crops cultivated alongside barley and lentils, used in everything from soups and stews to medicinal poultices. The ancients believed onions purified the blood, cured headaches, and even warded off curses. Whether that's true or not, you can't deny they made life taste better. Beside the onions, another basket catches your eye. Smaller, white bulbs with papery skins. Garlic. The woman sees your curiosity and grins. Shumshu, she says, handing you one. It's smaller than the garlic you know, slightly purple at the tips. She cracks it open with the flat of her knife, releasing a fragrance so strong it almost makes you dizzy. It's earthy, fierce, and primal, the very essence of ancient cooking. She motions for you to watch as she tosses both onion and garlic into a clay mortar. She adds a splash of oil, thick golden sesame oil, and begins to pound the mixture with a rhythmic, almost meditative motion. The pestle thuds softly, again and again, until the contents become a pale, fragrant paste. She dips her finger in, tastes it, then offers you a bit on a flat piece of bread. You hesitate for only a second. The flavor hits hard, spicy, warm, deeply savory. There's no salt yet, but it doesn't need it. The combination is rich enough to suggest a full meal. The woman smiles knowingly. This is the base of almost every Mesopotamian dish, the foundation of flavor, the first step toward stew, soup, or roast. She gestures toward a younger woman nearby, perhaps her daughter, who's tending to a pot bubbling gently over a small clay stove. The air above it wavers with heat. You lean closer and catch the scent of lentils simmering in broth. She lifts the lid briefly, stirring with a wooden spoon, and you glimpse the contents. a thick stew flecked with green herbs, onions, and crushed garlic. The older woman explains, in a mix of gestures and words you half understand, that this is shuchat, a lentil stew flavored with garlic, onions, and herbs like coriander and dill. It's a staple dish, humble, filling, and nourishing. Workers eat it for strength. Priests eat it for purity. Everyone, from king to laborer, eats it at some point. She ladles a bit into a small bowl and offers it to you. The texture is creamy, the flavor deep and layered. The onions have softened into sweetness. The garlic hums underneath, gentle now rather than sharp. It's comfort in its oldest form, the kind of meal that makes silence between people feel companionable rather than empty. As you eat, she talks, or perhaps reminisces. You catch bits of meaning in her tone even when you don't understand the words. She gestures toward the mortar again, then toward the stew, explaining that cooking isn't just mixing ingredients, it's coaxing out the hidden essence of each one. Onions bring sweetness, garlic brings fire, herbs bring balance. Without them, she says, food is only fuel. With them, it becomes something closer to happiness. You think about that, how flavor connects time and place. Somewhere, millennia later, someone else will be standing in a kitchen, chopping onions, complaining about the tears, and yet smiling when the smell fills the air. The daughter brings over a bundle of herbs, long, feathery strands of coriander, thick sprigs of dill, and leaves that look like leeks or wild onions. She crushes them gently in her palm, releasing a burst of fresh green aroma. Then she sprinkles them into the pot. The scent changes instantly, brightening, lifting. You realize that Mesopotamian cooking was anything but bland. With no sugar, no citrus, no modern spices, they built complexity from the earth itself, from what grew between riverbanks and irrigation ditches. The older woman adds a final touch, a small pinch of crushed salt gathered from the riverbeds when the water receded. She stirs, tastes, nods in satisfaction, then pours you another small bowl. This one, she insists, is right. As you eat, you notice others around you doing the same. Workers, traders, even a scribe who stopped by on his lunch break. Everyone has a small bowl, a chunk of bread, a moment of peace. You begin to understand that this stew isn't just food, it's community. After the meal, she shows you her tools, simple, functional, worn smooth from years of use. The mortar and pestle are carved from basalt. Her knives are bronze, their handles wrapped in linen for grip. The pots are clay, slightly cracked but still strong. She points proudly to one large jar painted with faint lines of cuneiform, a gift from a temple cook perhaps, or a record of an offering. You help her tidy the stall, brushing onion skins into a basket, wiping the mortar clean. She hums as she works, a tune you don't recognize, but somehow feel you've always known. It's the kind of melody that keeps rhythm with labor, that fills the spaces where words aren't needed. When she's done, she hands you a small piece of bread rubbed with garlic and herbs. Travel food, she says. You thank her, trying to say it in her language. She chuckles at your pronunciation, but seems pleased nonetheless. You step away from the stall, walking through the market once more. The smells blend together, bread, stew, smoke, spice, but underneath it all, there's still that familiar trace of onion and garlic. It follows you, clinging to your fingers, your clothes, the very air. You imagine that 5,000 years ago, someone else walked through this same place, carrying the same scent on their hands, unaware that the world they knew would someday fade into dust. But the smell, that earthy, human cooking smell, would survive, carried forward through kitchens and centuries. Because long before recipes were written, before cookbooks and measurements, people already knew this truth, that food is more than survival. It's memory, it's invention, it's the quiet art of making the ordinary taste extraordinary. And in that moment, standing in the fading heat of the day, garlic on your breath and stew in your belly, you feel closer to the people of ancient Mesopotamia than any history book could ever make you. The sun has shifted now, sliding toward late afternoon. The market's buzz has softened to a low murmur, replaced by the rhythmic chanting that drifts from the direction of Nippur's great temple. The scent of incense begins to mingle with the dust. Sweet, woody, faintly smoky. You follow it, weaving through narrow lanes until the city opens up into a vast courtyard. Before you rises the ziggurat of Enlil, the wind god, a massive stepped tower that gleams gold in the waning light. But your path doesn't lead up the tower. Instead, you turn toward a smaller doorway at its base, unmarked, half-hidden, and humming with activity. This is the temple kitchen, where food for both gods and humans is prepared. You slip inside, unnoticed for the moment, into a world that smells of roasting meat, crushed herbs, and heated stone. The space is warm, no, hot. Smoke curls toward openings in the high clay ceiling, and the air trembles above the hearths. Men and women move in practiced rhythm, their linen tunics streaked with soot and oil. Bronze knives flash briefly in the firelight. Pots bubble, lids rattle, and wooden spoons scrape against the sides of clay jars. If the city above is a living body, this room is its heart. You pause at the threshold, adjusting to the sensory overload. There's barley flour scattered across the floor, rows of skewered meat resting on racks, and jars filled with mysterious pastes. A young cook passes by carrying a heavy tray of bread, flat, round loaves scored with neat lines. He sets them beside a priest who is reciting a list from a clay tablet. The words are formulaic, a recipe for divine contentment. The priest's voice drones softly. 3 loaves for Enlil, 2 for Ninlil, 1 for the temple servants. Each offering is exact, not a crumb more or less. In Mesopotamia, food wasn't only nourishment, it was diplomacy between mortals and gods. You drift closer, drawn by curiosity, as another priest stirs a large pot over a low fire. The aroma rising from it is rich, lamb simmered with leeks, garlic, and coriander. You recognize some of the same ingredients from the market, but here they've been elevated into something ceremonial. The priest catches your gaze and smiles faintly. The gods, he murmurs, like flavor too. He gestures for you to come closer and hands you a spoon carved from wood. You stir the pot carefully, feeling the resistance of tender meat and thick broth. Steam rises, carrying the fragrance of oil and spice. The priest explains that this dish, tohu, is a sacred stew prepared for festivals. It's made with lamb, onions, garlic, cumin, and coriander. Sometimes dates are added for sweetness, or beer for depth. The recipe is older than memory itself. He dips a bit onto the back of your spoon, lets you taste. The flavor is astonishing, earthy and sweet, heavy with the richness of lamb and the warmth of spice. It's not fiery, not sharp, but layered in ways that make you want to close your eyes. Even the gods, he adds, would be impatient waiting for this to finish. Around the room, assistants knead dough, grind herbs, and shape offerings from flour and oil. You notice one woman arranging small pastries into a neat spiral on a bronze tray. They're filled with date paste and drizzled with honey, tiny luxuries meant for divine palates. The air is alive with movement, but everything happens according to ritual. A young boy rushes in carrying a basket of sesame seeds. He trips slightly, scattering a few across the floor, and freezes in horror. For a moment, the whole room stills. Then the head cook, a broad-shouldered man with flour on his beard, steps over, chuckles, and waves him off. "The gods won't mind," he says softly, sweeping the seeds aside with his foot. "They eat the scent, not the crumbs." It's an oddly comforting thought that gods might be satisfied just by aroma. You watch as a portion of each dish is set aside on a raised platform. Priests will later carry it to the inner sanctum, where it will be placed before the idol of Enlil. The rest, after an appropriate weight, will be eaten by the priests themselves. Offerings, you realize, rarely go to waste. The head cook invites you to help with the next task, preparing a batch of nindagal, great bread baked for temple festivals. He shows you how to mix barley flour with water, sesame oil, and a pinch of salt, kneading the dough until it's firm and elastic. You press your palms into it, feeling its warmth from the sun-heated flour. Once shaped into thick discs, the loaves are slid into a dome-shaped clay oven heated by coals. The cook explains that these ovens, called tanur, are common across the city, used in homes and temples alike. Their curved walls trap heat perfectly, baking bread in minutes. When the first loaf emerges, puffed and golden, the smell alone feels sacred. As it cools, the cook breaks a small piece and hands it to you. The bread is dense, slightly smoky, and faintly nutty from the sesame oil. He grins as you chew thoughtfully. Even the poorest man in Nipper, he says, can tell good bread from bad. Across the kitchen, a scribe sits at a low table, writing on a damp clay tablet. He's recording lists, quantities of grain, meat, oil, honey, and beer distributed to the temple. Historians still argue whether these records were more about accounting or devotion, the cook mutters. I think they were just trying to make sure no one accidentally took an extra loaf home. That earns a chuckle from you both. It's comforting, somehow, to realize that bureaucracy existed even 5,000 years ago. Eternal, tedious, and probably full of missing paperwork. You notice a set of small clay figures lined up on a nearby shelf. Tiny animals, birds, and people. The cook explains that before each major festival, the kitchen workers shape these figures as charms for good luck. If the lamb doesn't burn and the bread doesn't fall, he says, we thank these little fellows. One of them, a plump, smiling cook with a round belly, makes you laugh. The cook shrugs. That one's me, he admits, or so they say. Outside, the chanting grows louder. The sun dips lower, and shafts of light pierce the smoky air through narrow vents. The priests begin to gather the completed offerings: bowls of stew, loaves of bread, jars of beer, and plates of honey cakes. Each is lifted carefully, reverently, and carried into the inner chamber where the god awaits. For a moment, the kitchen falls silent. Everyone stands still, heads bowed. You hear the faint echo of the priest's voice from beyond the curtain. Words of thanks, of petition, of routine. When he emerges again, he smiles faintly and nods to the cooks. The offerings have been accepted. And then, as quickly as reverence began, the room returns to life. The remaining food is portioned out among the staff, equal shares, laughter resuming, spoons clinking against clay. The serious becomes social. You sit among them, eating your share of stew and bread, feeling the warmth of both fire and fellowship. Someone passes around a small cup of beer, thick, slightly sour, cloudy from fermentation. You take a cautious sip. It's not exactly refreshing, but it's oddly satisfying, like drinking bread made liquid. The cook grins. Barley for strength, he says, raising his cup. Garlic for courage. Beer for everything else. You raise your cup in return. By the time you leave, the temple kitchen is dimming into evening glow. Smoke curls lazily from the ovens, and the cooks are cleaning their tools with quiet satisfaction. You glance back once before stepping into the courtyard. From within the temple, you can still smell stew and bread and smoke, a reminder that worship here isn't only prayer and offering, it's labor, rhythm, and flavor. And as you walk away, you can't help but think, maybe the gods of Mesopotamia were less distant than people believed. Maybe they were simply hungry too. The streets grow quieter as you step away from the temple. The air, once thick with incense and roasting meat, begins to cool and settle. Evening in Mesopotamia feels softer somehow, the light bronze instead of gold, the noises low and familiar. You follow the winding lanes until the city's bustle fades into the gentle pulse of home life. Smoke rises from small courtyards, voices murmur through mud brick walls, and somewhere close by, a baby wails, quickly soothed by the rhythm of a mother's voice. You've left the world of priests and palaces behind and entered the world of ordinary people, farmers, potters, scribes, and weavers, the ones who keep the city breathing. A woman beckons you toward a doorway framed by reeds. Inside, a small hearth glows faintly, smoke curling upward through a simple vent in the roof. It's dim but warm. the light from the fire flickering across clay walls etched with years of smoke. The woman, her name sounds like Amma, though you might be mishearing it, moves with practiced ease, setting a clay pot beside the fire. A man sits cross-legged on the floor, repairing a fishing net, while two children chase each other around the room, laughing until Amma claps her hands and sends them to fetch water. You sit near the hearth, the clay floor cool beneath your legs, and breathe in the mingling scents: roasting barley, burning wood, and something earthy bubbling in the pot. Amma glances your way, smiling faintly. "You're just in time," she says, in the same tone any mother might use 5,000 years later. Dinner, as it turns out, is a stew again. Lentils, onions, a few chunks of goat meat, and a broth thickened with crushed barley. It's humble but hearty, and the smell alone is enough to make you feel hungry. Amma stirs the pot, humming softly, while her husband tosses a handful of dried herbs into the fire for luck. The children return, dragging a heavy water jar, splashing half of it onto their tunics. Amma pretends not to notice. The hearth, you realize, isn't just where food is made. It's where life happens. Every movement, stirring, mending, gossiping, scolding, circles back to this single glowing center. The fire provides warmth, light, and a place to cook, but it also holds stories, memories, the rhythm of daily survival. Amma ladles the stew into small clay bowls, one for each of you. Before eating, she reaches into a woven basket and pulls out round pieces of bread, coarse barley loaves baked earlier in a communal oven shared by the neighborhood. She tears one apart, steam escaping, and hands you a piece. It's chewy, slightly bitter, and perfect for dipping into the stew. Her husband, still mending his net, glances up. "The river's been kind this week," he says. "Small fish, but plenty of them." You nod, even though you're not entirely sure he expects an answer. The children, now quieter, dunk their bread into their bowls and eat in rhythmic, focused silence. As you eat, Amma talks about her day, about the price of onions in the market, about the temple tax that took another jar of barley from her stores. She complains mildly, but there's humor in her voice. Historians still argue whether women in Mesopotamia had much say in the home, you think, watching her manage everything from dinner to discipline. If this house is any example, the answer seems obvious. After the meal, the youngest child crawls into her lap, half asleep, clutching a rag doll made from linen scraps. The firelight paints the scene in warm amber tones. Amma brushes hair from the child's face, eyes distant but soft. "The gods like full stomachs," she says absently, "but mothers like clean bowls." She grins, hands you an empty one, and gestures toward the water jar. You help rinse the dishes, careful not to spill too much. The clay bowls are rough to the touch, worn smooth at the edges from years of use. Each bears faint fingerprints from whoever shaped them. Even the simplest tools here carry a trace of the people who made them, an unspoken history in every imperfection. Amma sets the bowls upside down to dry, then stokes the fire with a handful of date palm twigs. The flames leap briefly, throwing long shadows on the wall. The children are drowsy now, one curled against her leg, the other tracing lines in the ash with a stick. The room feels smaller, cozier, as though the fire has drawn all of life inward. You notice a niche carved into the wall above the hearth, a tiny shelf holding a small clay figurine, a female figure with wide hips and folded hands. Amma follows your gaze and explains softly that it's a household deity, a protector of the home, the one who keeps the fire steady and the bread from burning. She touches it gently, almost absent-mindedly, as though greeting an old friend. Then, with a mischievous glint, she leans toward you and whispers, "Sometimes, when the stew tastes too salty, I blame her." You laugh, nearly spilling the bit of beer she's just poured you. She winks, pleased. Better to anger a god than admit you forgot the barley. Outside, night fully settles over Nipper. Through the small opening in the roof, stars glimmer faintly. The same constellations you'd see now, though perhaps with different names. The air cools, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant fires. You hear faint music from somewhere, a reed flute maybe, or someone humming on a nearby rooftop. Amma's husband finishes his net, coils it neatly, and sets it aside. He joins the rest of you near the fire, stretching his legs. He picks up a small drum, just a round frame with stretched animal skin, and taps it softly. The rhythm is slow, soothing, repetitive. The children perk up, clapping along. Amma joins in with a low hum, and before long, the room fills with quiet music, domestic, imperfect, deeply human. This, you realize, is the real sound of history, not battles or proclamations, but the creak of wood, the hiss of stew, the beat of a drum played to send children to sleep.
When the song fades, Amma leans back, sighs contentedly, and says something that sounds like a blessing. You don't catch every word, but you understand the sentiment. Gratitude for food, fire, and another day survived. It's not grand religion. It's something smaller, more personal. Faith in the rhythm of daily life. Before you leave, she presses a small piece of dried date into your hand. For the road, she says. Sweet dreams. You thank her, slipping it into your pouch, unsure how to express the warmth you feel. The family waves as you step into the night, the glow of their hearth still flickering behind you.
Outside, the streets are nearly empty. A few lanterns burn low, casting pale light across the walls. You walk slowly, savoring the lingering taste of the stew, the faint hum of the drums still echoing in your ears. Somewhere nearby, another family laughs softly. Another fire crackles. The city sleeps, but its kitchens, its stories, its flavors, they never really go silent. Each meal, each moment around a hearth is a thread in a vast tapestry of living memory. And as you wander through the quiet alleys of Nipper, you realize you're not just observing history, you're tasting it, one slow, smoky breath at a time. The next morning dawns with a haze of dust and light, a pale gold sheen that catches on the river and turns every reed into a tiny mirror. You follow the main road that snakes toward the palace district, passing scribes on their way to the archives and servants hauling baskets of produce. The hum of ordinary life gives way to something more deliberate, quieter, slower, and lined with ceremony. You're entering the part of the city where meals don't just fill stomachs, they display empires. The palace of the king, or perhaps the governor, depending on which century you've landed in, looms ahead, its mud brick walls faced with gleaming gypsum plaster. The air smells faintly of myrrh and roasted meat. Guards in linen kilts stand at the gates, spears glinting in the sun. One of them raises an eyebrow at you, but you're waved through by a steward with a golden seal hanging from his neck. Apparently, guests are expected today. Inside, the courtyard bursts with motion. Servants carry trays laden with fruit, ceramic jugs of beer, and baskets overflowing with bread so fresh that steam still curls from their tops. In one corner, a team of cooks is busy tending to spits where lamb and goat rotate slowly over coals. The aroma is enough to make your stomach rumble, though you try to play it cool. A short, rotund official with ink-stained fingers approaches you, his voice brisk but not unkind. "You're early," he says, eyeing your dusty sandals. "Good, you can see how power really gets cooked around here." He leads you down a narrow passage into the palace kitchen. The scene makes even the temple kitchens of Nipper seem modest. This is culinary theater, organized chaos under a roof of smoke and bronze. A dozen cooks work in a rhythm so precise it might as well be choreography. One stirs a pot of barley stew while another grinds spices into a bright orange powder. A boy runs by carrying a jug of oil twice his size. Somewhere in the back, a man shouts, "Not that goat, the one with the gold tag." You catch a whiff of something unfamiliar. Cinnamon, maybe? Or cassia? The steward nods approvingly when you ask. "Imported from Dilmun," he says, referring to a distant island trade hub. "Costs more than a house, but the king says it makes the lamb taste like heaven." Historians still argue whether such exotic spices were truly common in early Mesopotamian banquets or simply reserved for royal experiments and showing off. But standing here, surrounded by bronze pots, crushed herbs, and sweating cooks, you realize that exaggeration might be part of the point.
A large table dominates the center of the room, covered in an array of ingredients: onions, garlic, leeks, coriander, cumin, and handfuls of dried fruit. There's honey, thick and golden, and something darker, a syrup made from dates, glistening like amber. The steward dips a spoon in and lets you taste. It's rich, almost smoky, sweet enough to make you blink. "Date syrup," he says proudly, "better than sugar, and we had it first." At another station, a pair of cooks prepare fish, delicate river perch from the Euphrates, wrapped in reeds and stuffed with herbs before being roasted in clay. The scent that rises as they crack the shells open is nothing short of divine. You could swear it smells like lemon, though no lemons exist here yet. Perhaps it's the coriander and sesame combining, or maybe the cooks have discovered some trick lost to time. Food, the steward says, isn't just food, it's proof. He gestures toward a massive bronze platter being polished to a mirror shine. Proof of wealth, of loyalty, of favor from the gods. The bigger the feast, the longer your name lasts. He's not exaggerating. Inscriptions from across Mesopotamia record feasts that lasted days, banquets thrown to celebrate temple dedications, royal weddings, and military victories. One Assyrian king famously bragged about feeding nearly 70,000 guests. That's a lot of barley stew. You move to another corner where desserts are taking shape. A woman with flour-dusted hands rolls out thin sheets of dough, brushing each with honey and sprinkling them with chopped dates and nuts. She layers them carefully, one on top of another, until the pile resembles something eerily like modern baklava. She catches your raised eyebrows and laughs. "You think you invented this?" When she slides the tray into the oven, the scent that follows is almost dizzying. Nutty, caramel, faintly spiced. It's a reminder that indulgence is one of humanity's oldest instincts. The steward taps your shoulder and beckons you onward, through a doorway that opens into the banquet hall itself. You blink as you step into the cool shade. The transition from smoky kitchen to marble floor feels almost holy. The room is immense, lined with tall columns painted in blue and gold. Murals of hunting scenes stretch across the walls, and woven reed mats cover the floor. Low tables are arranged in a horseshoe shape, each draped in linen and surrounded by cushioned seats. Servants glide silently between them, arranging bowls, pouring beer, and setting down baskets of fruit. At the head of the hall, a raised platform holds a table slightly grander than the rest. Upon it, a great bronze platter gleams, ready for the centerpiece dish, a whole roasted lamb stuffed with barley, onions, garlic, and herbs, glazed with honey and beer. The smell alone could humble kingdoms. The steward whispers, "Wait for it." Moments later, trumpets blare, the doors swing open, the king enters, draped in shimmering fabric, beard braided and oiled, expression halfway between boredom and divinity. Everyone bows. The king waves languidly, sits, and gestures for the feast to begin. Servants move like clockwork, bringing dish after dish: roasted fish, lentil stew, barley bread, fresh figs, and small bowls of cheese mixed with herbs. There's laughter now, soft and restrained. The laughter of people very aware that they're being watched by someone with absolute power. You notice how the king eats slowly, deliberately, each bite a statement. When he praises a dish, the cook responsible is rewarded with wine. When he frowns at another, the steward scribbles something onto a tablet. Probably not a thank you note. The room's energy ebbs and flows with his mood. At your table, a scribe murmurs. We call it naptanu, the act of eating in public as performance. You nod, thinking how little has changed across millennia. Somewhere, a modern politician is still doing the same thing, only with better lighting. A lull falls after the first course, replaced by soft music, lyres and drums, the sound gentle and hypnotic. Servants refill jugs of beer and set down cups carved from alabaster.
The beer is thick, unfiltered, and meant to be drunk through straws made of bronze or reed to avoid the floating grains. You take a cautious sip. It tastes like liquid bread, sweetened with date syrup. Beside you, a diplomat from another city raises his cup. "To Nipper's Kitchens," he says, "and to the gods who make them smell so good." You clink cups, gently, because these are not your cups to break, and drink. By the time the dessert emerges, the air has grown heavy with warmth and laughter. The honey-drenched pastries from earlier reappear, glistening and golden. They disappear almost as quickly as they arrive. Even the king smiles, briefly. As the feast winds down, you step away from the noise and stand near a carved window where a faint breeze drifts in. Below, the city stretches out. Rooftops, courtyards, temple towers glowing faintly in the twilight. Somewhere down there, Amma and her family are finishing their modest supper by the hearth, unaware that the same ingredients, barley, garlic, honey, beer, are binding their lives to the ones in this hall. You can't help but smile. In the grandest kitchens or the humblest homes, flavor always finds its way to the center of life. Power may set the table, but it's hunger that keeps everyone coming back. And as the last note of the lyre fades, you realize that while history remembers kings for wars and monuments, their most human legacy might just be the meals they shared. Proof that even in the oldest empires, satisfaction was still best served warm. The sun has slipped lower over the city by the time you leave the palace. The air feels cooler now, heavy with the scent of river reeds and faint smoke from cooking fires. You follow the sound of water until the grand avenues narrow again into dirt paths, and the polished grandeur of the court gives way to muddy banks and wooden docks. Here, along the curve of the Euphrates, Mesopotamian life breathes at its most honest. You can hear it before you see it. The low, rhythmic slap of water against boats, the laughter of children throwing pebbles, and the occasional guttural grunt from a fisherman hauling in his morning's luck. The river glimmers like liquid bronze in the light. It's calmer now, but you sense its quiet strength, the same steady pulse that's kept this civilization alive for thousands of years. You walk closer, your sandals sinking slightly in the damp earth. A man with a sunburned face waves to you. He's sitting on the edge of a flat-bottomed reed boat, pulling in a net that glistens with tiny silver flashes. "You look hungry," he says, his Akkadian rolling out like a chuckle. "Or maybe you just look lost." You admit that it might be both. He grins and gestures for you to help. The net is heavier than it looks, full of wriggling river perch and carp, their scales catching the sunlight. You haul it in together, and as the fish tumble onto the wooden deck, you realize that this is more than just a meal source. It's an entire rhythm of life, daily, patient, and deeply tied to the river's moods. "Every family along the banks eats fish," he tells you, sorting the catch into baskets. "Rich or poor, priest or potter, the gods gave us water, so we eat what swims in it." He holds up a small catfish by its tail and smiles. "Even the ugly ones." You can't help laughing. The catfish blinks, unimpressed. Fish, as it turns out, was a staple in the Mesopotamian diet, especially for those living near the Tigris and Euphrates. Archaeologists have found fish bones in ancient kitchens and even temple waste pits, proof that people across all classes ate them in some form, grilled, salted, dried, or stewed. And surprisingly, cuneiform tablets mention dozens of different species, from tiny minnows to large carp weighing several pounds. As the fisherman works, another man nearby begins cleaning and gutting the larger fish with a bronze knife, his motions smooth and practiced. He tosses the entrails into a clay bowl where they'll later be used to make a rich broth. Nothing goes to waste here. The smell of the fresh catch mixes with that of smoke and brine. "We salt them," the fisherman explains, "and sometimes dry them in the sun. Makes them last through the winter floods." He gestures toward a rack of fish hanging from wooden poles nearby, their silver skins slowly turning pale under the heat. The sight is oddly beautiful, shimmering like wind chimes. You wander a little farther down the bank, where a woman kneels beside a clay fire pit. She's cooking what looks like a stew in a pot, blackened from years of use. Steam rises in lazy curls, carrying with it the scent of fish, garlic, and coriander. You crouch down beside her and ask what she's making. "A hulu," she says, stirring slowly. "Fish stew with barley, onions, and herbs. It's for my husband. He thinks it keeps him strong enough to row upstream." She glances at you with a smile that suggests she has her doubts. You watch as she sprinkles in a pinch of crushed herbs, maybe thyme, maybe something no longer known to the modern spice rack, and then adds a dollop of thick, sweet date syrup. The mixture hisses as it hits the bubbling stew, releasing an aroma both savory and faintly sugary. You can almost taste it in the air, the kind of balance that happens only when a people have spent centuries perfecting how to make the most of what they have. You ask if she ever gets tired of fish. She laughs so hard she nearly drops her spoon. Of course! But then we remember the floods, when the fields drown and the barley rots, and we thank the river for what still feeds us. It's a reminder that the Mesopotamians didn't just live near the water, they depended on it completely. The Euphrates wasn't just a food source, it was transport, irrigation, trade route, and occasionally destroyer. Every year it flooded and withdrew, leaving behind fertile soil and unpredictable moods. And yet the people never abandoned it. They built canals, dikes, and fishing docks instead, a relationship of wary respect rather than dominance. You step aboard one of the reed boats tied along the bank. The fisherman from earlier follows, pushing the craft gently into the slow current with a long pole. The sound of water laps softly against the sides, and the movement feels hypnotic. "We fish mostly at dawn and dusk," he says, "when the river's cool and the gods are half asleep." That last part makes you smile. Historians still argue whether fishing was ever a formal trade or simply a seasonal livelihood, but it's clear from ancient art that fishermen occupied an important place in the social order. Not noble, perhaps, but vital. As the boat glides along, you pass a cluster of floating baskets, traps made from woven reeds, each holding a few unlucky fish. The fisherman reaches into one and pulls out a plump carp. "This one," he says, "goes to the temple kitchen. The priests say the gods like the taste." He winks. "But I think it's the priests who like the taste." It's a fair suspicion. Temple records do mention offerings of fish, though not as often as lamb or grain. Still, the symbolism was rich. Fish represented fertility and abundance, the bounty of life renewed each spring. You drift a little farther, where the water deepens and darkens. The fisherman points to the opposite bank. "See those ruins?" You squint and spot what looks like the crumbling outline of an old quay. "That's where the old smokehouses stood," he says. "Long ago, merchants came from far upriver to buy salted fish here, sent it all the way to the mountains." The idea surprises you. International trade in ancient fish. And yet, clay tablets confirm it. The Mesopotamians exported dried and salted fish across the region, even using it as a kind of currency at times. Whole shipments of preserved fish appear in trade lists alongside textiles, metals, and oil. The fisherman sighs, dipping his hand into the river. "My father said his father saw the river run red one year, not from blood, but from clay when the floods came early. The fish floated to the surface for days. We thought the gods were angry." He smiles faintly. "Maybe they were just bored." There's a certain fatalism in his voice, the calm of someone who knows that no matter how carefully you plan, the river will always have the last word. As you return to shore, evening begins to settle over the water. Fires flicker along the banks, and the faint sound of music drifts from the village beyond. You follow the fisherman up to his home, a modest clay brick structure where his family is already preparing supper. Inside, the smell of grilled fish fills the air. A small grill made from fired clay sits at the center, glowing with coals. On top, several small fish sizzle, brushed with oil and dusted with crushed herbs. The woman you met earlier gestures for you to sit. You watch her carefully flip each fish, her movements confident and sure. When one slips and lands half in the ashes, she shrugs, blows on it, and sets it back on the grill. "Adds flavor," she jokes. You share the meal with them, crispy skinned fish, barley bread, and a jug of beer that tastes faintly of honey and smoke. The youngest child stares at you as you eat, giggling every time you try to pull bones from your mouth discreetly. When the meal ends, the family sits quietly, staring at the embers as the night grows cooler. Somewhere nearby, frogs begin to sing, a soft, rhythmic sound that mingles with the whisper of water. The fisherman leans back and murmurs, "Tomorrow, we fish again." You can't think of anything more eternal than that. The tools may change, the empires may fall, but the river keeps giving, and the people keep casting their nets, patient and unhurried. The Euphrates slides by outside, dark and gleaming, carrying with it the weight of millennia. Fish, stories, prayers, and the eternal promise of another meal waiting beneath the surface. The morning air smells faintly sweet and earthy as you follow a narrow lane toward a cluster of storage silos. They rise like watchful sentinels, their mud brick walls streaked with shadows from the early sun. Here, in the bustling heart of the city, the lifeblood of Mesopotamia isn't water or gold, it's grain, especially barley, the foundation of nearly every meal. You step closer to the first silo, a squat, round structure with a narrow doorway. A man with calloused hands and a wide-brimmed head wrap gestures for you to follow. Inside, the air is dim and dusty, heavy with the scent of stored grain. Bags of barley stacked to the ceiling creak slightly under their weight. The man scoops a handful, letting it sift slowly through his fingers. Each kernel is smooth, round, and golden, like tiny suns. "Barley," he says, "the bread of gods and mortals alike." You nod, noticing the simplicity and power of it. Barley wasn't just for bread. It fed people, livestock, and even brewed into beer, one of Mesopotamia's most ubiquitous beverages. Archaeologists still debate whether beer or bread came first, but standing here, it's clear that both were indispensable. Even the poor could afford some form of sustenance from this humble grain. Outside the silo, a group of women sits cross-legged on mats, preparing barley for daily bread. One crushes kernels with a small stone roller, while another winnows chaff from grain in a shallow basket. The rhythmic motion of sifting, grinding, and tossing creates a soft percussion that blends with the morning city sounds, the bray of donkeys, the chatter of merchants, and the distant hum of temple chants. The man leading you explains how bread was central to Mesopotamian life. There were dozens of types: flatbreads, leavened loaves, stuffed breads, and honey-sweetened pastries. Most households had a small clay oven, the tanur, where bread baked in high, dry heat, forming a crisp crust and soft interior. You're reminded of the smell in Amma's kitchen, or the temple hearth, and the palace ovens. The same principle everywhere, only the scale differed. Nearby, a boy carries a tray of freshly baked barley loaves. He hands one to you, still warm. You tear a piece off, noticing the texture, dense yet pliable, slightly smoky from the clay oven, and nutty from the toasted grains. A thin smear of date syrup adds sweetness. The flavor is simple but profound, nourishment made entirely from earth and patience. Historians still argue whether the ninda, or daily bread, was considered sacred in the way beer and meat were, but tablets from Nippur suggest it played a ritual role in both temple offerings and family meals. The act of sharing bread was symbolic, reinforcing bonds between family, friends, and the divine. You watch as one woman breaks a loaf in half, offering a piece to her neighbor across the mat. It's a gesture that's small, quiet, yet weighty with meaning. The man shows you a jar of sourdough starter, made from fermented barley. Its tangy aroma fills the air when opened, reminding you of a modern sourdough loaf. "This keeps the bread soft," he says, "and it makes the flavor richer." You dip a finger into the mixture, tasting a faintly sour, yeasty tang that tingles on your tongue. It's the invisible labor of days past, microbes, water, and time combined into a living ingredient. You follow the women to a small hearth outside the silo, where a low fire glows beneath a clay oven. One woman slips a loaf into the opening, and it puffs immediately, cracking along the scored lines. Smoke curls lazily around her fingers as she removes it, placing it gently on a mat to cool. You remember the palace kitchens and temple hearths. Same techniques, same reverence for the baking process. It's clear that bread was more than food. It was life itself. She gestures toward a small mound of barley bran left over from milling. Instead of discarding it, she sprinkles it into a pot of simmering stew. Nothing went to waste here. The same grains fed people, flavor, and even aroma. A subtle hum of continuity through daily labor. You can see the same principle in every part of Mesopotamian kitchens. Respect for ingredients and an understanding that survival demanded care. Nearby, another boy carries a small jar of oil and brushes it over a loaf. The sheen catches the sunlight, making the bread look almost golden. Barley gives life. Oil gives flavor, he explains proudly. You nod, biting into a piece that melts slightly under the touch, its warmth and aroma filling your senses. As the morning stretches, baskets of barley are carried to different homes, hearths, and temple kitchens. Some will become bread, some beer, and some offerings. You watch a family in a small courtyard break bread together. Parents, children, and an elderly grandmother all sharing the same loaf, tearing it apart with care. There's no fanfare, no ceremony, just the quiet intimacy of a meal shared, a ritual older than writing itself. Later, the man leads you to a small milling station near the river. Water from the Euphrates turns a stone wheel, grinding grain into flour with soft, endless rhythm. The noise is hypnotic, the scent faintly sweet, almost meditative. The grain moves in cycles, from earth to silo, from hand to stone, from fire to table. You can feel centuries of tradition in every motion. The smell of bread and barley fills your lungs as the day warms. You watch as women, men, and children go about their routines, carrying sacks of flour, tending ovens, and preparing small loaves for sale. Each loaf is a testament to patience, diligence, and knowledge passed from parent to child, generation to generation. Before leaving, the man hands you a small, dense loaf to carry with you. It's not fancy, not gilded with honey or stuffed with dates. It's ordinary barley bread, humble and essential. You realize that in Mesopotamia, these simple loaves were more than food. They were currency, labor, sustenance, and connection. Every household depended on them. Every meal centered around them. Every festival included them. Walking away from the silos, you tear off a small piece and taste it. Warm, slightly chewy, faintly nutty. It's ordinary, yet extraordinary in its quiet endurance. Across the city, hearths fire up, ovens puff with smoke, and the smell of bread spreads across streets, alleys, and courtyards. Barley is the city's heartbeat, and you are finally attuned to its pulse. The late afternoon sun drifts low, softening the edges of the city and painting the mud brick walls in a warm amber glow. You wander through narrow lanes until a pungent, earthy aroma draws you toward a small courtyard where several large jars sit half buried in the sand. This is the world of oils and fats, essential, transformative ingredients in Mesopotamian cuisine. Here, flavor is built not just from grains or meat, but from the oils that coat, preserve, and enhance every dish. A woman kneels beside a low stone press, her hands dusted with crushed sesame seeds. She pours the seeds into the press and begins to twist a wooden lever, coaxing out a thin, golden stream of sesame oil into a waiting clay jar. The process is slow, rhythmic, almost hypnotic. Tiny droplets catch the sunlight, gleaming like liquid gold as they accumulate in the jar. You taste a drop, nutty, earthy, and faintly sweet. It's remarkable how something so simple can carry such depth. Sesame oil, she explains, is for cooking, for offerings, and sometimes for medicine. The same oil that flavors the stew also protects the skin. You raise an eyebrow. Protects the skin? She nods. Some people rub it on themselves after bathing. Others even mix it with crushed herbs as ointments. You probably won't survive this if you're thinking of trying it without practice. Historians still argue whether oil in Mesopotamia was primarily culinary, medicinal, or ritual. But standing here, it's clear the lines were blurred. Oil was versatile, valuable, and often treated with the respect reserved for luxury items today. The presses were common in towns across Sumer, Akkad, and Babylonia, yet every family and temple kitchen seemed to have its own method, handed down from generation to generation. Nearby, a man stirs a pot of simmering stew, adding a generous splash of oil. The scent changes immediately, richer, rounder, with a depth that seems to vibrate in your chest. He gestures for you to taste. The stew, made of lentils, onions, and herbs, now carries the weight of its ingredients, unified by the fat that binds them together. Even the simplest meal can become extraordinary with the right touch of oil. You follow the woman to another courtyard, where a cluster of clay jars sits half buried in sand, each containing animal fats. Sheep, goat, and sometimes fish oil, all were used for cooking. The fats are rendered slowly over low heat, their aroma both savory and strangely sweet. You watch as a small ladle scoops the liquid and drizzles it over a flatbread resting on a mat. It sizzles faintly, soaking into the porous surface, enriching flavor and extending freshness. A young apprentice approaches carrying a small bowl of honey. Some mix it with oil, he says, for cakes or pastries, makes them richer, softer. You nibble a small piece of barley bread dipped in sesame oil and honey. The combination is surprisingly subtle, sweet, nutty, and earthy all at once. It feels ceremonial, yet entirely ordinary, a bridge between daily sustenance and celebration. Even the palace kitchens used fats strategically. You remember the lamb roasted in the royal banquet hall, glazed with date syrup, and perhaps brushed with oil to encourage browning? Outside Nippur, trade routes carried olive oil from distant lands. Yet here, sesame and animal fats formed the backbone of flavor. Oils preserved, enhanced, and sometimes even concealed the limitations of ingredients. A tough cut of meat or a bland vegetable could be transformed with a careful brush of fat. You watch as another woman mixes a blend of herbs, crushed garlic, and oil into a small clay pot. She calls it a tuhu paste, meant to season fish or roasted vegetables. You dip a finger and taste it, sharp, fragrant, and entirely awake in your mouth. You imagine the cook in the temple kitchen using a similar blend, perhaps over lamb or barley stew, the smell carrying through the smoke-filled room to priests and assistants alike. Fat was not just functional, but also a symbol. The wealthier households, temples, and royalty could afford larger quantities of oil and rendered animal fats. Less affluent families made do with scraps, adding only enough to flavor rather than enrich meals. Even today, historians still argue whether the prevalence of oils in Mesopotamia reflects luxury, necessity, or a combination of both. Here you see the answer in practice: necessity elevated into artistry. The woman now shows you how to store oil properly. Earthen jars are sealed with clay and sometimes lined with resin to prevent spoilage. Sunlight and heat are the enemies. Sand and shade are friends. A poorly stored jar of oil can go rancid within weeks, and Mesopotamians knew this. Their careful storage methods ensured that kitchens, from temple to home, had a reliable source of flavor year-round. As the sun sinks lower, the courtyard softens into shadow. You watch the last streams of oil drip into jars, their golden light fading into amber as night approaches. The aroma lingers, rich, warm, earthy, and you realize how foundational fats were to daily life. They didn't just season meals, they nourished, preserved, and symbolized care. Nearby, a child runs past, holding a tiny jar of sesame oil, pretending it is treasure. Perhaps, in a sense, it is. For Mesopotamians, oils and fats were life itself, binding families, feeding temples, and bridging ordinary meals with celebration. The aroma, taste, and texture are memory incarnate, a quiet continuity across centuries. You step away, carrying the lingering scent of sesame and rendered fats. The city hums softly in the evening, fires flicker, and kitchens across Nippur continue their work. Bread is baked, stew simmers, and oil glistens in bowls and jars. The rhythm of life moves on, lubricated by both literal and figurative golden streams. Even as night falls, you can still taste the presence of oils everywhere, in homes, temples, markets, and palaces. Every dish you've encountered, humble barley bread, temple lamb stew, or royal roasted fish, owes its richness, its depth, its magic to fat. It is the quiet, golden thread running through Mesopotamian meals, making the ordinary extraordinary and connecting the hands of cooks across centuries. The streets of Nippur are quieter now, the afternoon heat giving way to a gentle warmth that brushes the walls and rooftops like a soft blanket. You wander toward a corner of the city known for its small spice stalls and herb gardens, a place where aroma and color compete with the dust and sun. Here, flavor is an invisible art, woven into the everyday, subtle but transformative. A small wooden cart catches your attention. Piles of dried herbs, jars of crushed seeds, and bundles of fresh plants spill over the sides, releasing their scents into the warm air. The merchant, a wiry man with deep-set eyes and hands colored faintly by turmeric, greets you. "You smell it, don't you?" he asks, his voice gentle. "The air carries it, even before the cooking begins." You nod, inhaling deeply. There's coriander, cumin, mustard seed, and something faintly citrusy that you can't place, perhaps an imported spice from Dilmun or the distant mountains. He lifts a small jar of what looks like tiny dark granules. "This is asafoetida," he says, the word unfamiliar but sharp in his mouth. Adds depth to lentil stews and fish sauces. A pinch goes a long way. You taste a trace and recoil slightly. Pungent, almost sulfuric, but intriguing. He chuckles at your expression. You probably won't survive this if you're expecting bland barley porridge. Historians still argue whether Mesopotamians widely used spices like asafoetida or if it was reserved for elites in temple kitchens. But here, in the market's quiet corners, it seems everyone has access, in small doses, carefully measured. You follow him toward a row of low clay pots, each containing fresh herbs, mint, dill, fenugreek, and savory varieties that you don't recognize but can smell vividly. They're bundled carefully, leaves crisp and aromatic. A young girl tends the pots, spraying them lightly with water and brushing away dust with a small reed brush. The ritual is quiet, almost meditative. Herbs aren't just for flavor, the merchant explains. They cure, they cleanse, they please the gods. He gestures to a clay bowl where a few sprigs of mint and coriander float in water. Temple kitchens use these in offerings, in soups, in bread. A meal without herbs is, well, incomplete. You pick up a bundle of dill and rub it between your fingers. The scent is sharp, green, alive. You remember the lamb stew in the palace, the barley bread in Amma's hearth, and the fish along the Euphrates. Each dish carried its own subtle signature of herbs, sometimes obvious, sometimes hidden, an aroma that lingered in memory more than on the tongue. Nearby, a boy crushes coriander seeds with a small stone mortar, the fragrance releasing into the warm air. The merchant nods approvingly. Freshly ground seeds are stronger, better than any powdered import. 1 day old, and it's already weaker. You taste a few crushed seeds. Lemony, slightly sweet, earthy. It's remarkable how small the difference is between ordinary and extraordinary. Some herbs, the merchant tells you, were grown not for food alone, but for ceremonial purposes. Bay leaves, for example, were thought to protect households from evil spirits. Fenugreek was used in both cooking and medicine. Even something as simple as garlic carried symbolism, warding off disease and unpleasant visitors alike. You imagine the same sense lingering in temple kitchens or royal banquet halls, connecting ordinary meals to ritual life. He points to a clay jar of cumin seeds. This one, he says, was so valuable it was sometimes traded for silver. You taste a single seed, warm, earthy, slightly bitter, almost smoky. We don't always eat it by itself, he explains, but it makes everything else taste better. You think back to the palace lamb, the fish along the Euphrates, Amma's modest barley stew. Every dish gains new life with a whisper of spice. The market itself is quiet now. A soft hum of conversation, footsteps, and the occasional bleat of a goat from a nearby pen. You watch a woman select small bundles of herbs, whispering instructions to a child who carries them carefully back to their courtyard. The rhythm of food, flavor, and care repeats endlessly, quietly shaping daily life. You pause to observe the baskets of dried seeds and crushed roots, coriander, cumin, caraway, mustard, and nigella. Each has a story, a taste, a ritual. Some traveled long distances through trade networks. Others grew in the small courtyards of Nippur itself. Even the humblest home could add depth to its meals through herbs, binding the everyday to a subtle artistry. In a corner, a young man rolls small bundles of mint and dill into reed baskets for sale. He sprinkles a few crushed seeds for aroma. The process is delicate, careful, and almost meditative. You realize that seasoning was an art in Mesopotamia, invisible yet essential, humble yet vital. The merchant leans closer, pointing to a small, unusual root. Galangal, he says, his eyes twinkling. Strong, fiery, but rare, only for special occasions. You taste a sliver, immediately feeling the heat spread across your tongue. He laughs softly. Better to taste than to underestimate. Historians still argue whether galangal was common or reserved for elites, but I've seen it in temple kitchens myself. By late afternoon, the market quiets further. Stalls are covered, herbs tied and stored, and merchants sit in shaded corners, sipping water or beer, watching the city wind down. You take a final deep breath, savoring the mingling scents of coriander, cumin, dill, and mint, a symphony of aromas. You realize that in Mesopotamia, herbs and spices were more than decoration. They preserved, enhanced, healed, and enchanted. They connected homes, temples, and palaces through invisible threads of taste and scent. A pinch could transform ordinary barley, humble fish, or simple stew into something remarkable. It was subtle magic, practiced daily, refined over millennia. As you step away from the herb stalls, the sun lowering behind the rooftops, the scents linger in your mind, and you can almost taste them again, in the palace, by the river, in Amma's hearth. Flavor in this city was a quiet, persistent thread, linking ordinary lives to rituals, feasts, and history itself. The evening settles in slowly, softening the edges of the city with shadows that stretch across rooftops and alleyways. You follow the faint, yeasty scent drifting through the air, a smell so familiar yet strange in its depth. It leads you to a small courtyard near the river, where clay jars bubble and hiss quietly over low fires. You've found the brewing houses of Mesopotamia, where barley is transformed into beer, not just a drink, but a cornerstone of social life, sustenance, and ritual. Inside the courtyard, a stout woman with flour-dusted hands and a kind, knowing smile tends to a large ceramic vessel. Steam rises, carrying the scent of malted barley and faint honeyed sweetness. She stirs the mixture slowly, her arm moving in wide, patient arcs. Around her, apprentices crush barley with stone mortars, sift it through woven baskets, and pour water from the Euphrates into large clay pots. The process is rhythmic, almost meditative, and it carries a quiet energy that seems to pulse with the river itself. Beer, she says, wiping her hands on a cloth, is not just for celebration. It feeds workers, temples, and even children in some households. You blink. Children? She nods, smiling faintly. Not the strong stuff for the young ones, of course. Mostly thin, watered-down brews. But it's nourishing, comforting. Historians still argue whether beer was safer than water, but you can see why families trusted it. You taste a spoonful of the lightly fermented liquid, its flavor nutty, slightly sour, and unexpectedly sweet. It warms your chest in the gentle way only slow fermentation can. You remember the barley bread from earlier and realize how intimately these staples are connected. The same grain that feeds the body in one form nourishes it in another. Nearby, a boy pours crushed date syrup into a separate vessel, preparing a sweetened batch for temple offerings. The syrup thickens as it heats, and the aroma mingles with the malt to form a perfume that fills the courtyard. You can almost picture priests carefully ladling this amber liquid into small bowls, presenting it to gods in ceremonies that were as much about devotion as taste. The woman explains the brewing process further. Barley is soaked, allowed to sprout slightly, then crushed and mixed with water to create a mash. The mixture ferments in open vessels, sometimes flavored with herbs or honey. You lean closer, watching the froth rise, bubbles catching the fading light. The entire process relies on patience, observation, and intuition. No two batches are ever exactly alike. You notice a group of laborers sitting on mats nearby, drinking from small reed straws that dip into wide clay jars. The straws prevent the grain solids from clogging their mouths. One man grins at you, offering a sip. The taste is earthy, mild, and slightly effervescent. You take it, careful not to spill, and realize how integral beer is to community. It's a drink to share, a pause in labor, a quiet ritual that binds people together. In a small corner, you spot a jar filled with bitter herbs. Sometimes we add these, the woman explains, for flavor, for preservation, and maybe to impress the gods. You probably won't survive this if you try to guess which herbs are in which batch. She laughs, and the apprentices mimic her, stirring the frothy liquid in unison. Beer wasn't just for casual consumption. Festivals, weddings, and temple rituals all relied on it. Clay tablets from Nippur and record workers being paid partially in beer rations, a system known as bapir, the use of bread beer for sustenance. You sip again, considering how ordinary life depended on this liquid gold. Builders, scribes, priests, and servants alike relied on it for nourishment, hydration, and comfort. The courtyard quiets as night falls. The fires flicker, and the steam rises in lazy curls, illuminated by the last light of day. The apprentices set aside their mortars and baskets, and the woman lifts a small bowl of the finished brew to her lips. You notice her eyes closing briefly, savoring the taste, the warmth, the ritual. In that moment, beer is more than sustenance. It is meditation, a pause in the endless rhythm of labor. Nearby, a child giggles, holding a small reed cup filled with watered-down beer. You remember the merchant's herbs, Amma's hearth, and the palace feasts. The same grain, the same water, transformed into countless forms: bread, stew, lamb, beer. Flavor, nutrition, and ritual are inseparable in Mesopotamian life, each reinforcing the other. You walk toward the river, carrying the faint scent of fermenting barley with you. Somewhere across the water, another brewing house hums quietly, the air thick with aroma and soft conversation. The Euphrates flows steadily, reflecting lantern light, connecting households, temples, and palaces. Beer, like bread, is a thread linking ordinary and extraordinary lives, practical, social, spiritual. The woman waves as you depart. Remember, she says, every batch is a little different. Every sip tells a story. Some of it is luck, some skill, some blessing. Historians still argue whether beer was considered a gift from the gods or simply a clever human invention, but we all know its magic. You smile, feeling the warmth of her words settle alongside the heat of the brew in your chest. You wander back into the streets, hearing the faint clatter of pots and laughter from nearby kitchens. Fires glow faintly through doorways, smoke rising and carrying scents of roasting fish, barley, and herbs. Beer joins the orchestra, subtle yet essential, filling bellies and hearts alike. It is ordinary, indispensable, and profoundly human. As night deepens, you realize how this simple drink shapes rhythm and ritual. In homes, temples, and palaces, it connects people across time and space. Even without gold or power, a shared cup of beer unites families, laborers, and strangers. The city hums softly around you, alive with the unseen, quiet pulse of daily sustenance and ceremonial delight. And as you pause on the riverbank, listening to the water, the distant voices, and the faint hum of fermentation, you understand that Mesopotamian life, flavor, and culture are inseparable. Grain, barley, oil, herbs, and beer forming a continuous golden thread from hearth to palace, from river to festival, and from one generation to the next. The night deepens over Nippur, soft shadows stretching across rooftops and courtyards. You follow a faint, sweet scent drifting through the alleyways, a fragrance of syrup, ripe fruit, and gentle fermentation. It leads you to a small market corner lit by oil lamps, where jars of preserved fruits, bowls of dates, and baskets of figs are displayed like treasures. Here, sweetness is not just indulgence, it's preservation, celebration, and a subtle art that ties meals, rituals, and daily life together. A woman with hands dusted in fine flour and sticky honey motions for you to approach. Dates, she says, gesturing to a pile of plump, amber-colored fruits. The sweet backbone of our cuisine, eaten as they are, baked into bread, or pressed into syrup for cooking. You pick one up. It's soft, sticky, and perfumed, a dense jewel of sugar and sunlight. She smiles. You probably won't survive this if you think honey is just for cakes. Honey and date syrup were the primary sweeteners in Mesopotamia. Refined sugar was centuries away. Date syrup, called dibs, was thick, dark, and fragrant. It flavored stews, glazed roasted meats, sweetened breads, and even enriched beer. Honey, often used sparingly, carried both culinary and ritual significance. It was a gift for gods, a medicine for humans, and a symbol of abundance. Historians still argue whether sweeteners were widely available to ordinary families or primarily reserved for temple and palace kitchens, but the market suggests that some access was common. Nearby, a young boy dips figs into a shallow pool of syrup, rolling them gently until they are coated in amber sheen. He places them carefully into small reed baskets. Preserved fruit lasts through the flood season, he explains. Even when barley rots or fish is scarce, this keeps us sweet. You nod, watching the ritualistic care with which he handles each fig. Preservation was more than necessity, it was artistry. You step closer to a clay jar filled with raisins, dark and glistening. The woman dips her hand in, letting a handful slip through her fingers. Dried fruit, she says, is patience made edible. Sun, wind, and time create a flavor that is completely different from the fresh fruit. We eat it as snacks, gifts, or mixed into pastries. You taste one, chewy, concentrated, almost tangy in its intensity. It's remarkable how drying and storage transform the simplest harvest into something nuanced and extraordinary. In a corner of the market, you spot small clay jars with thick, dark pastes. One is a mixture of figs and honey, cooked slowly until it forms a sticky mass. Another contains dates crushed and blended with crushed nuts and herbs. The woman smiles as she lifts a jar for you to sniff. The aroma is rich, dense, and layered, sweet with a hint of warmth from spices you can barely name. She dips a tiny finger and offers you a taste. It clings to your tongue, sweet, earthy, and utterly captivating. You remember the barley bread, the fish from the river, the oils, and the herbs. Here, sweetness enters subtly, elevating ordinary food into something celebratory, ceremonial, or comforting. Fruit preserves were versatile, added to stews for a delicate tang, mixed with nuts for festive pastries, or simply eaten as snacks during labor or study. Even modest households made use of this technique, balancing flavor, nutrition, and preservation. The woman gestures toward a small oven where pastries are baking. Thin layers of barley dough, drizzled with honey and filled with finely chopped dates and figs, puff slightly and release steam that carries the perfume of sweetness into the air. You notice the careful layering, almost like the palace baklava you glimpsed before. But here it's smaller, simpler, and practical. Yet the result is the same. Sugar and fruit enriching the mundane, making it memorable. Nearby, a boy presses small date cakes into clay molds, creating rounded shapes. Temple offerings, he whispers. Sometimes we leave them for the gods, sometimes for visitors, sometimes just for ourselves. The duality of function and ritual is clear. In Mesopotamia, sweet foods were rarely just indulgence. They were currency, gifts, sustenance, and devotion. You taste a tiny cake, dense, sweet, and warming, carrying a hint of sesame oil from earlier, tying the flavors of the city together. You wander further, noticing small jars filled with fig syrup, honey, and thick date pastes stacked in cool, shaded corners. Even in ordinary homes, families prepared preserves to last through the dry months and flood season. The labor is subtle, cutting, crushing, boiling, and drying, yet the payoff is significant, sweetness when it is most needed. It's quiet magic, a continuity of skill, taste, and care. The woman hands you a small bundle of mixed dried fruit. "Take these," she says softly. Even a small taste carries the season with it: sun, river, soil, labor, and patience. You hold it reverently, feeling the weight of history in the sticky, sweet pieces. Across Nippur, from palace to temple, from riverbank to hearth, the same principles of preservation, flavor, and ritual apply. Sweetness isn't frivolous. It's survival, artistry, and memory, distilled into edible form. By nightfall, the market quiets. Lanterns glow faintly, casting flickering light across baskets and jars. You step back, inhaling deeply, tasting the lingering sweetness on your tongue, and realize that fruit, honey, and syrup are more than culinary tools. They are bridges between ordinary sustenance and ritual, between daily life and celebration. Each preserved fig, date, or raisin carries not only flavor, but the imprint of human patience, ingenuity, and devotion. The city hums softly around you. Ovens crackle, hearths warm, and the river whispers. From palace to humble courtyard, sweetness, like barley and beer, threads through every meal, every moment, every connection between people. You realize that this quiet labor, drying, preserving, sweetening, has shaped life, taste, and memory across centuries. You step away from the stalls, the aroma of syrup and roasted fruit clinging to your senses, and feel the rhythm of the city around you. It's late, calm, and alive. Sweetness, preserved in jars and loaves, reminds you that even the simplest pleasure requires care, patience, and attention. And in Mesopotamia, every meal, every bite is a testament to that enduring dedication. Night has settled fully over Nippur. The city exhales a gentle, dusty breath, the streets emptying as lamps flicker in homes and courtyards. Fires glow faintly, smoke drifting lazily upward, carrying aromas of barley bread, simmering stews, grilled fish, sweet fruits, and the faint, nutty scent of sesame oil. You walk slowly along a quiet lane, absorbing the symphony of smells and recalling the meals, rituals, and daily routines that have guided Mesopotamian life for millennia. You pause at a small courtyard where a family sits cross-legged around a low clay table. Plates of barley bread, fish, and stew are spread carefully before them. Small jars of date syrup glimmer in the firelight. The father tears a loaf in half, offering a piece to the children, who giggle and stretch tiny hands to reach it. The mother pours a thin, dark beer from a wide clay vessel into small cups. Everyone drinks, laughter mixing with the crackle of the fire. Even without formal ceremony, the rhythm of eating together carries a quiet sacredness. The interplay of everyday and ritual life is woven deeply into Mesopotamian meals. Bread is not just sustenance, but symbol. Fish and meats nourish the body while honoring the river and gods. Herbs and spices transform simple dishes into subtle art. Oils enrich and preserve. Beer sustains, socializes, and celebrates. Sweetness from dates and honey adds memory and delight. Historians still argue whether ordinary households replicated temple practices or if sacred meals remained exclusive. But in practice, there is continuity, a thread of flavor, patience, and reverence connecting all. You stroll past a small temple courtyard where priests are quietly preparing offerings. Flatbreads, small fish, dates, and honey cakes are arranged on reed mats. Smoke rises from incense burners, mingling with the rich aroma of cooking. The offerings are simple yet thoughtful, emphasizing that even the gods receive meals built on daily labor, knowledge, and care. You note the parallels. The same ingredients appear in humble homes, palaces, and temple kitchens alike, demonstrating the universality of taste, ritual, and nourishment. Night deepens further, and you reflect on the riverbanks where fishermen worked, hauling silvery catches from the Euphrates. Fish were transformed into stews, grilled dishes, or preserved in oil and salt. You remember the golden shimmer of sesame oil, the subtle bite of cumin and coriander, the tang of herbs crushed fresh. Every flavor, every scent is a story of people, place, and time. The quiet magic of turning humble resources into meals that sustain and delight. In quieter alleys, you notice small hearths where a mother stirs barley porridge for her children, sweetened lightly with date syrup. Nearby, a jar of preserved figs and honey sits ready for tomorrow's breakfast or an evening snack. Even simple dishes carry care and intention, echoing the broader culinary culture you've witnessed throughout the city. Ordinary labor, careful preservation, and attention to taste are intertwined, demonstrating that sustenance is never merely physical, but cultural, social, and emotional. You wander to a courtyard near the river where small clay jars bubble faintly over coals. Beer ferments quietly in the vessels, releasing a yeasty, comforting aroma. The apprentices stir gently, whispering to one another, learning skills passed down through generations. You sip a thin cup, earthy, warm, slightly sweet, and recognize that beer, like bread, oil, herbs, and preserved fruit, is part of a continuum. Labor, sustenance, and subtle pleasure intersecting daily life. The city is hushed now. From palace to temple, from simple home to marketplace, the work of cooking, preserving, and sharing meals has ceased for the night. You pause, letting the sensory tapestry settle in your mind. The sharp bite of herbs, the warmth of bread, the shimmer of fish skin, the golden richness of oil, the soft sweetness of dates and honey, the faint tang of fermented barley. Each element is ordinary, yet extraordinary when combined into the daily rhythm of life. As you walk toward a small bridge overlooking the Euphrates, the river mirrors the night sky, dark and reflective, carrying both the city's physical and spiritual flow. You remember the fishermen, the bakers, the brewers, and the families. Each meal, each ritual, each careful preparation is a thread in a fabric that spans centuries, connecting lives across generations. Even the smallest loaf of barley bread or the simplest herb paste becomes a vessel of continuity, memory, and care. You settle at the riverbank, listening to water lapping against reeds and wooden posts. The soft hum of distant fires, faint laughter, and the occasional animal call creates a lullaby of life, slow and steady. You reflect on the Mesopotamian diet as a symphony of labor, flavor, ritual, and culture, a gentle, pervasive rhythm that defines the everyday while connecting it to history, spirituality, and memory. The night grows quieter, the firelight dims, and the scents fade into the cool air. You feel the calm of the city settling into your bones, the gentle reminder that meals are more than sustenance. They are care, ritual, patience, flavor, and connection. Every bite carries centuries of knowledge. Every aroma echoes the river. Every sip of beer, every morsel of bread or fish, every taste of honeyed fruit is part of the enduring thread that binds human life to land, river, and society. Slowly, your breath aligns with the rhythm of Nipper at night. You watch the stars reflect on the water, the city murmuring softly around you. The memories of scents, flavors, and textures float in your mind. blending into a quiet, comforting lull. You sense the day's labor complete, meals consumed and shared, rituals observed, the city ready for sleep as you are ready to rest. The city sleeps, the river flows, and you are wrapped in the enduring, gentle rhythm of Mesopotamian life. Flavors, labor, and care woven together into the quiet poetry of daily meals.
As the night deepens, let yourself exhale slowly. Imagine the warmth of the hearth, the gentle glow of lamplight, and the quiet murmur of a family sharing bread and stew. Picture the soft shimmer of sesame oil, the subtle tang of crushed herbs, and the comforting sweetness of dates and honey resting on your tongue. Let your mind drift to the slow, rhythmic movements of hands crushing barley, tending fires, and stirring pots. Each gesture, a meditation, a connection to countless lives before you.
The Euphrates flows steadily beneath the bridge, whispering its ancient song. You feel its pulse in your chest, steady and patient, carrying with it the labor, care, and rituals of Mesopotamian kitchens. The city hums softly in your imagination, the laughter of children, the soft clatter of dishes, the bubbling of beer and stew, all melding into a gentle lullaby. Release the day's tension as you breathe. Let the scents, flavors, and textures of the meals you've wandered through dissolve into a calm awareness. You are surrounded by history, nourished by centuries of care, flavor, and patience. Everything is quiet now, and yet profoundly alive in memory.
The last images of oil, the sweet gleam of dates, the soft warmth of fresh bread, the gentle froth of beer, the aromatic swirl of herbs and spices. Feel the comfort, the nourishment, and the quiet magic of daily life in a world long past, carried gently into your dreams. Sleep begins to claim you, and the city, the river, and the kitchens of Nipper settle around you, timeless and serene. End of script. Sweet dreams.